Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you to our 32nd annual meeting in the beautiful and historic city of Samarkand. My name is Richard Porter. I'm the Managing Director of Communications for the EBRD, and shortly the official ceremony will get underway. But first of all, let's just for a few minutes set the scene. We want to tell you a little bit more about our work in Uzbekistan, in other countries, and looking back on a momentous year and focusing on our strategic priorities. And here to guide us through is a distinguished orchestral conductor from Uzbekistan, Firuza Abdurahimova. Please welcome Firuza to the platform. Thank you for that wonderful performance. Thank you to our magnificent conductor, our musicians in 4 countries, and this was a piece composed for this event. So thank you all involved in that. Okay, we're now going to move towards the official business of the event. So please, can I invite our distinguished guests to come to the stage now, please. Thank you.
Xonimlar va janoblar, yuqori martabali mehmonlarimizni prezidiumga taklif qilamiz. So'z Uzbekistan Respublikasi Prezidenti Shavkat Mirziyoyevga. And now we would like to invite His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, to the lectern.
Rahmat. Hurmatli Renaud-Basso xonim, hurmatli Brunner janoblari, xorijiy hukumatlar, xalqaro tashkilot va diplomatik korpus vakillari, xonimlar va janoblar. Yevropa tiklanish va taraqqiyot banki boshqaruvining kengashining bu yilgi yig'ilishi qadimiy va betakror Samarqandda o'tkazilayotgani biz mamlakatimizga, islohotlarimizga yuksak ishonch va ehtirom ifodasi sifatida qabul qilamiz. O'zbekistonga xush kelibsizlar. Bugungi anjumanni o'tkazish uchun aynan Samarqand shahri tanlangani chuqur ramziy ma'no ega deb o'ylayman. Azaldan Buyuk Ipak yo'li chorrahasida joylashgan ushbu azim shahar sharq va g'arb, shimol va janubni o'zaro bog'laydigan Yevropa, Osiyo va Afrika qit'alari o'rtasida savdo, iqtisodiy, madaniy va ilmiy texnologik almashuvlar makoni bo'lib xizmat qilgan. Bu zaminda turli sivilizatsiyalar o'rtasida yuksak muloqot madaniyati shakllangani bilan biz doimo faxrlanib kelamiz. Dunyoning barcha mintaqalaridan 2,5 mingdan ortiq mehmonlar ishtirok etayotgan bugungi anjuman ana shu ezgu an'analarni yangi bosqichda davom ettirilib, xalqlarimiz o'rtasidagi do'stlik va hamjihatlik ko'prigini mustahkamlaydi deb ishonaman. Tobora kuchayib borayotgan hozirgi geosiyosiy ziddiyatlar davrida bunday ochiq va yaqin muloqotlar, do'stona aloqalarni yanada kengaytirish barcha mamlakatlar uchun albatta nihoyatda zarur. Shu ma'noda bugungi nufuzli anjumanning asosiy mavzusi barqarorlik uchun investitsiya deb belgilangani katta ahamiyatga egadir. Barchangiz ko'rib turibsiz, global iqtisodiy muammolar tobora avj olmoqda. Iqlim o'zgarishi va ekologik xatarlar kuchaymoqda. tabiiy resurslar esa yanada kamayib bormoqda. Bunday murakkab vaziyatda bugungi va kelgusi avlodlar munosib hayot kechirishi uchun yangi texnologiya va loyihalarga ko'proq investitsiyalar kiritilishi talab etilmoqda. Shu nuqtai nazardan bugungi muhim anjuman davlatlar o'rtasidagi ko'p qirrali va uzoq muddatli aloqalarni yangi bosqichga olib chiqadi. Iqtisodiyotlarimizning rivoji uchun sarmoyalarni yanada ko'paytiradi. Barcha a'zo mamlakatlar taraqqiyotiga albatta beqiyos hissa qo'shadi. Aziz do'stlar, O'zbekiston Yevropa tiklanish va taraqqiyot bankining bunday formatidagi yig'ilishni roppa-rosa 20 yil oldin bo'lib o'tgan edi. Bugungi anjumanda yangi mehmonlar bilan birga avvalgi yig'ilishlarda qatnashgan ishtirokchilarni ham ko'plarini ko'rib turibman va ular bilan ham suhbat o'tkazdim. Shu o'rinda bir fikrni alohida ta'kidlab aytmoqchiman. Bugungi O'zbekiston kechagi O'zbekiston emas. 6 yil muqaddam boshlangan qat'iy islohotlarimiz natijasida mamlakatlarimiz qiyofasi butunlay o'zgardi. Bugun siz azizlarni mutlaqo yangi muhitda dunyoga keng ochilayotgan, barcha sohalarda hamkorlik uchun tayyor bo'lgan yangi O'zbekistonda qabul qilayotganimizdan g'oyat mamnunmiz. So'nggi yillarda yurtimizda inson qadrini ulug'lash, iqtisodiyotni erkinlashtirish va jahon bozorlariga dadil kirib borish bo'yicha ulkan yutuqlarga erishdik deb ayta olamiz. Jumladan inson huquqlarini amalda eng oliy qadriyat darajasida ta'minlash maqsadida majburiy mehnat va bolalar mehnatiga to'liq barham berildi. So'z va e'tiqod erkinligi, gender tenglikning ta'minlash bo'yicha erishilgan amaliy natijalarimiz xalqaro hamjamiyat tomonidan e'tirof etilmoqda. Mamlakatimizda ilk bor kambag'alchilik mavjudligini tan oldik va uni qisqartirish uchun samarali tizim yaratdik. Bu tizim davlat ko'magiga muhtoj oilalarni to'liq qamrab olindi. Shu bilan birga qonun ustuvorligini ta'minlash, sud mustaqilligi va odil sudlov institutini mustahkamlash, xususiy mulk daxlsizligini kafolatlash borasidagi islohotlarni qat'iy davom ettiryapmiz. Aholi va tadbirkorlar manfaatlarini ishonchli himoya qiladigan mutlaqo yakdil tizim ma'muriy sudlar tashkil etildi. Jamiyatda korrupsiya murosasiz bo'lish muhitini shakllantirish eng ustuvor vazifalarimizdan biriga aylandi. Xorijiy investor va hamkorlarimiz uzoq kutgan yengillik va imkoniyatlar iqtisodiy islohotlarimizda o'z aksini topmoqda. Valyuta tizimini erkinlashtirilgani, tashqi bozorlarga chiqish bo'yicha to'siqlar olib tashlanganligi, 7000 dan ziyod xomashyo va tovarlarga bojxona bojlari bekor qilingani natijasida tashqi savdo aylanmasi 2 karra oshdi. Shu bilan birga soliq yuki qariyb 2 barobarga kamaygani, soliq ma'murchiligini soddalashgani, O'zbekistonda mintaqamizdagi eng jozibador fiskal tizim shakllanganini xalqaro tashkilotlar tomonidan e'tirof etilmoqda. Islohotlarimizga ishonch ortgani tufayli yillik xorijiy sarmoyalar hajmi 2017-yilga nisbatan 3 barobarga ko'paydi. Umuman mamlakatimizda qulay biznes muhitini yaratilgani natijasida tadbirkorlar soni 4 barobarga oshdi, ya'ni 485 mingdan 2 million nafarga yetdi. eng muhimi siyosiy va iqtisodiy islohotlarimizni xalqimiz to'liq qo'llab-quvvatlanmoqda. Yaqinda umumxalq referendumida qabul qilingan yangilangan konstitutsiyamizda islohotlarni ortga qaytmasligi va bardavom bo'lishini qat'iy kafolatlandi. Bir so'z bilan aytganda, biz o'zimiz tanlagan uzoq muddatga mo'ljallangan ochiqlik va barqaror taraqqiyot yo'lidan og'ishmasdan yanada dadil oldinga boramiz. Birinchidan, mamlakatimizda investitsiya va ishbilarmonlik muhitini yaxshilash, investorlarga yanada qulay sharoitlar yaratishni yaxlit tizim asosida amalga oshiramiz. Bu borada O'zbekiston Respublikasi Prezidenti huzuridagi xorijiy investorlar kengashi chet ellik sarmoyadorlar bilan bevosita muloqotni yo'lga qo'yib, o'zaro manfaatli loyihalar va uzoq muddatli strategiyalarni birgalikda ishlab chiqishda hal qiluvchi bug'un bo'ladi. Hech shubhasiz, Yevropa tiklanish va taraqqiyot banki bilan birga tashkil etilgan ushbu muloqot platformasi bizga yangi tajribalar olib keladi. Yangi imkoniyatlar yaratadi. Islohotlar uchun yangicha yondashuvlarni joriy qilishga ko'maklashadi. Investorlar qayerda bo'lmasin, investitsiya vazirligida tashkil etilgan yagona darcha orqali 14 ta hudud, 208 ta tuman va shaharlarda hamda O'zbekistonning xorijdagi barcha elchixonalarida ularga zarur ko'mak va xizmatlar ko'rsatiladi. Shuningdek, yil yakunigacha xalqaro ekspertlar bilan hamkorlikda tariximizda ilk bor xalqaro tijorat sudi faoliyati yo'lga qo'yiladi. Ikkinchi, biz tovarlar, xizmatlar, kapital va mehnat bozorlarini yanada erkinlashtirish siyosatini jadal davom ettiramiz. Jumladan, dunyodagi ishlab chiqarish zanjirlariga qo'shilish maqsadida Jahon savdo tashkilotiga a'zo bo'lishda katta qadamlar tashladik. Ushbu yo'nalishda bu yil salmoqli natijalarga erishamiz deb ishonaman. Uchinchi, ortiqcha byurokratiya biz uchun eng katta muammo va shu byurokratiyani qisqartirish va korrupsiyani tak tomiri bilan yo'q qilish bundan buyon ham davlatimiz va jamiyatimizning diqqat markazida bo'ladi. Bu borada boshlangan ma'muriy islohotlarni izchil davom ettirib, inson va biznesga ko'maklashadigan, ularga sifatli xizmat ko'rsatadigan, ixcham va samarali davlat boshqaruv tizimini joriy etamiz. Hurmatli bank boshqaruvchilari, bir fikrni ochiq aytish kerak. Islohotlarimizni amalga oshirish va hozirgi natijalarga erishishda xalqaro hamkorlarimizning ko'magi biz uchun juda muhim ahamiyatga ega bo'lmoqda. Bugun qat'iy ishonch bilan ayta olaman, O'zbekistonni barqaror rivojlantirish yo'lida Yevropa tiklanish va taraqqiyot banki bizning strategik hamkorimizga aylandi. Ayniqsa bankning mamlakatimizdagi loyihalar portfeli 4 milliard yevrodan oshgani, shundan 3 milliard yevrolik loyihalar so'nggi 4 yilda boshlangani bu fikrni yaqqol tasdiqlaydi. O'tgan yil yakuni bilan O'zbekiston bankning 5 ta eng asosiy hamkorlari qatoriga kirdi. Bu bizni birgalikda qilgan ishlarimizni eng katta yutug'imiz deb bilaman. Yillik investitsiya hajmi bo'yicha esa uning Markaziy Osiyodagi eng yirik biznes sherigiga aylandi. Eng muhimi, bank bilan xususiy sektorning rivojlantirish borasidagi yondashuv va maqsadlarimiz ham uyg'un va xomahangdir. Hozirgi vaqtda mamlakatimizda bank loyihalarida xususiy biznesning ulushi 55% ga yetgani ham shundan dalolat beradi. Ayniqsa bugungi kunda o'ta dolzarb bo'lgan yashil energiya, ichimlik suvi, yo'l transport, ekologiya kabi sohalarda hamkorligimiz jadal rivojlanmoqda. Xususan qayta tiklanadigan energiya sohalarida bankning 600 million yevro mablag'lari ishtirokida yirik loyihalarni boshladik. Bunday faol hamkorligimiz iqtisodiyotimizga boshqa xorijiy investorlarni jalb etishga ham katalizator bo'lib xizmat qilmoqda. Fursatdan foydalanib, bizning qo'llab-quvvatlayotgan Yevropa tiklanish va taraqqiyot banki rahbariyati, ayniqsa bank prezidenti Renaud-Basso xonimga, bankka a'zo davlatlar hukumatlari va boshqaruvchilariga, bank bilan hamkor tashkilotlar va investorlarga, biz bilan birgalikda loyihalarni amalga oshirayotgan barcha bank xodimlariga chuqur minnatdorchilik bildiraman. Hurmatli do'stlar, biz bundan buyon ham islohotlarimizni davom ettirishda rivojlanish borasidagi xalqaro tashkilotlar, jumladan Yevropa tiklanish va taraqqiyot banki bilan quyidagi yo'nalishlarda hamkorlikka tayanamiz. Birinchidan, biz mamlakatimizning barqaror iqtisodiy o'sishini ta'minlashda faqat va faqat xususiy sektorga tayanamiz. Shu bois kelgusi taraqqiyotimiz xususiylashtirish jarayonlari bilan chambarchas bog'ligini yaxshi tushunamiz. Bu borada korxonalardagi davlat ulushlarini sotish, strategik kompaniyalar va yirik banklar aksiyalarini ochiq savdoga chiqarish bo'yicha yil boshida katta marralarni oldik. Bugun mana shu Yevropa tiklanish banki rahbariyati bilan mana shu davlat ulushini korxonalarda transformatsiya qilish bo'yicha alohida dastur qabul qilishga ham kelishib oldik. Nimaga aytsangiz, bankni rahbariyati xodimlari bilib turibdiki, bizning rejalarimiz xususiylashtirish bo'yicha juda katta va bu rejalarimizni bilasizlarmi, oldingi xatolarga yo'l qo'ymaslik uchun kelajakda biz faqat bularni tajribasiga suyanib ish ko'rishni niyat qildik va bular bizni bu masalada katta ana shu rejalarimizni qo'llab-quvvatlashga katta va'dalar berdi va biz yo'l xarita qilishga kelishib oldik. Shuning uchun strategik kompaniyalar va yirik banklar aksiyalarini ochiq savdoga chiqarish bo'yicha yil boshida aytganimda katta marralar oldik. Xususan ilk bor iqtisodiyotimiz uchun strategik ahamiyatga ega 40 ta korxona IPOga olib chiqiladi. Ushbu yo'nalishda Yevropa tiklanish taraqqiyot banki bilan aytganimda katta yo'l xarita dasturini amalga oshiramiz. Birgina misol, mamlakatimizning eng yirik banklari Sanoat qurilish banki va Asaka bankining xususiylashtirish bo'yicha Yevropa tiklanish va taraqqiyot banki bilan faol ish olib boryapmiz. Shu bilan birga mamlakatimizning tabiiy resurslaridan samarali foydalanish, eng zamonaviy texnologiyalari bor investorlarni jalb etish bo'yicha bank bilan alohida dasturni boshladik. Biz kambag'allikni qisqartirish bo'yicha oldimizga katta marralarni qo'ydik. Bunga erishish uchun tadbirkorlarga yangi imkoniyat va sharoitlar yaratamiz. Ushbu maqsadlarda kichik va o'rta biznesning moliyaviy qo'llab-quvvatlash bo'yicha bank bilan hamkorlikni yanada kengaytirishdan manfaatdormiz va bu masalalar bo'yicha ham muloqot qilib, kelishib olib, kelajakka katta rejalarni birgalikda amalga oshirish uchun katta dastur qabul qilishga ham kelishdik. Ikkinchidan, infratuzilma, tibbiyot, ta'lim, transport, ekologiya kabi davlat ixtiyoridagi sohalarda davlat xususiy sheriklik loyihalarini kengaytirish. Bu borada bank bilan mamlakatimizda ilk bor Namanganda ichimlik suvi tarmog'ini boshqarish, Toshkent Samarqand zamonaviy magistral avtomobil yo'lini qurish loyihalarini boshlayapmiz. Salohiyati yuqori bo'lgan turizm sohasida ham davlat xususiy sheriklikning kengaytiramiz. O'ylaymanki, sizlar Samarqandda bo'lib, mamlakatimizning turizm borasida katta istiqbolga ega ekanini o'zingiz his qilib turibsiz. Umuman mazkur anjuman doirasida sog'liqni saqlash, ta'lim, infratuzilma, transport, energetika sohalarida 40 dan ortiq yirik xususiy sheriklik loyihalari taqdimoti o'tkaziladi. Ushbu loyihalar sizlarga katta qiziqish uyg'otishiga ishonchim komil. 3-dan yashil iqtisodiyot, ayniqsa yashil energetika sohalarini jadal rivojlantirish. Biz 2030-yilga qadar elektr energiyasi ishlab chiqarishda qayta tiklanuvchi energiya manbalarini ulushi 40%gacha yetkazishni reja qilganmiz. Albatta, bu yerda o'tirgan bankirlar, boshqaruvchilar biladilarki, bu raqam kichkina raqam emas, O'zbekiston uchun bu juda katta raqam. Lekin biz shu raqamni amalga oshirish bo'yicha juda katta poydevor, izlanish, juda katta o'rganish bo'yicha tajriba orttirdik va bu tajribani albatta mana shu xalqimiz bilan birga, sizlar bilan birgalikda, investorlar bilan albatta amalga oshiramiz. Bu borada Yevropa tiklanish va taraqqiyot banki bilan shu yilning o'zida umumiy qiymati 1.2 gigavat bo'lgan 3 ta yirik quyosh stansiyasi barpo etiladi. Shu bilan birga bugungi anjuman bo'lib o'tayotgan Ko'hna Samarqand bankning yashil shaharlar dasturiga yaqinda kiritildi. Biz Nukus, Andijon, Buxoro va Namangan kabi shaharlarimizni ham ushbu dasturga kiritishda bankning ko'magiga tayanamiz. 4-dan biz yangi O'zbekistonda ayollar tadbirkorligini yanada qo'llab-quvvatlash, ularning g'oya va tashabbuslarini ro'yobga chiqarish uchun teng imkoniyatlar yaratishga alohida e'tibor qaratamiz. Bu borada bank bilan amalga oshirayotgan xotin-qizlar bandligini ta'minlash, ularning iqtisodiy faolligini oshirish bo'yicha dasturlarimiz alohida e'tiborga sazovordir. Biz bunday loyihalarni keskin oshirish bo'yicha bank bilan hamkorligimizni yanada kengaytiramiz. 5-dan bank bilan birga yangi agrotexnologiyalar, suvni tejash va oziq-ovqat xavfsizligini ta'minlash bo'yicha yana ko'plab yangi loyihalarni amalga oshirishga tayyormiz. Global oziq-ovqat taqchilligi bilan bog'liq muammolar kuchayib borayotgan hozirgi sharoitda bunday loyihalar bank uchun ham, investorlar uchun ham juda foydali bo'ladi deb hisoblayman. Hurmatli anjuman qatnashchilari, biz Markaziy Osiyoda hamkorlikning rivojlantirishni yangi O'zbekiston tashqi siyosatining eng ustuvor yo'nalishlaridan biri sifatida belgilab olganmiz. Mintaqa davlatlari rahbarlarining qat'iy siyosiy irodasi va ishchil sa'y-harakatlarimiz natijasida bugun Markaziy Osiyo yaxshi qo'shnichilik va sheriklikning yorqin namunasiga aylanib bormoqda. Jumladan qo'shnilarimiz bilan iqtisodiy munosabatlarni kengaytirish maqsadida biz qo'shma investitsiya fondlarini tashkil etdik. Sanoat, energetika, transport va suv xo'jaligida bir qator yirik loyihalarni boshladik. Biz Yevropa tiklanish va taraqqiyot banki hamda boshqa xorijiy hamkorlarimizning bunday mintaqaviy loyihalarda faol ishtirok etishga taklif etamiz. Muhtaram xonimlar va janoblar, so'zimning yakunida yana bir fikrni alohida ta'kidlamoqchiman. Bugungi xalqaro anjuman Yevropa tiklanish va taraqqiyot banki bilan mamlakatimiz o'rtasidagi hamkorlikning yangi pog'onaga olib chiqish uchun tarixiy imkoniyat yaratmoqda. Shu bilan birga Samarqanddagi 71 ta mamlakat hukumatlari vakillari tashrif buyurgani ham ular bilan o'zaro manfaatli loyihalarni boshlashga katta turtki berishga ishonaman. Bugungi O'zbekiston investitsiya taqdimotida mamlakatimiz biznes sohasidagi qanday katta imkoniyatlarga ega ekanini atroflicha ko'rsatib berildi. Bundan tashqari anjuman doirasida bo'lib o'tayotgan sessiya va uchrashuvlarda sizlarga yangi loyihalar batafsil taqdim qilinadi. Shu kunlarda har bir anjuman ishtirokchisi O'zbekistondagi yangi biznes yo'nalishlarini o'zi uchun kashf qilishiga men ishonaman va bunga biz hamma imkoniyatlarni yaratib beramiz albatta. Shu bilan birga yurtimizning qadimiy va boy tarixi, betakror madaniy merosi, mehmondo'st va ochiq ko'ngil odamlarimiz sizlarda unutilmas taassurotlar qoldiradi deb men bunga ham ishonaman. Nimaga desangiz, hammalaring Samarqandda ko'rib, xalqimizni bag'ri kengligini ko'rib turibsizlar va mehmondo'stligini ham sezib turibsizlar. Barchangizga mustahkam sog'lik, faoliyatingizga katta yutuq va omadlar, anjuman ishiga esa muvaffaqiyatlar tilayman. E'tiborlaringiz uchun rahmat.
Your Excellency, Mr. President Mirziyoyev, distinguished governors, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call the 2023 annual meeting of the Board of Governors of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development to order. On behalf of the Board of Governors, I would like to welcome you all to our meeting this afternoon. I would particularly like to welcome, of course, His Excellency President Shavkat Mirziyoyev, as well as all the host country dignitaries who we are honored to have with us here today. I would like to thank His Excellency Mr. President for his keynote speech welcoming all of us to Samarkand. And now I would propose that we adopt the agenda and approve the provisions relating to the conduct of our meeting, which are included in the report of the Procedures Committee and have been circulated to all governors. Is there agreement that we adopt the agenda and the provisions relating to the conduct of the meeting? I don't see any other meanings in that. Thank you. I don't see any objections, and I don't hear any objections either. So I declare that the agenda and the provisions relating to the conduct of the meeting have been adopted. And I was told that I have to do that. Okay. So, Your Excellencies, distinguished governors, Mr. President, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, it is truly an honor to address you now as the chair of the Board of Governors and to welcome you all, and especially our distinguished guest, of course, and his guest speaker, His Excellency President Mirziyoyev, to this 32nd annual meeting of the EBRD. Mr. President, thank you for sharing your perspective with us on the socio-economic situation and the developments of Uzbekistan in the last years. And as EBRD shareholders, we are of course ready to support Uzbekistan in line with the mandate of the EBRD. But the work of EBRD or any other international finance institution alone cannot defend countries against the most naked forms of aggression that have seen in Europe since 1945. More than 1 year has passed since Russia launched an unprovoked and unjustifiable war of aggression against its neighbor Ukraine, and a direct attack on the rules-based international order. More than 1 year of human suffering, more than 1 year of missiles and drones raining down on Ukrainian civilians and Ukrainian infrastructure and businesses as well. And on behalf of all shareholders, I want to warmly welcome the bank's deployment of 1.7 billion euros in support of Ukraine in 2022. That level of support for a country under assault is a remarkable achievement by the bank, making it rightly the largest country of operation and clearly the overarching focus of this institution. How to support Ukraine going forward will be the key focus of our discussions tomorrow, and therefore I'm pleased to announce that the governor in Kiev will be the first to address us at the plenary tomorrow. Our Ukrainian friends also understand the need to retain our global perspective. There's no trade-off between EBRD in cooperation and coordination with its peers supporting Ukraine to the maximum extent possible, and on the other hand, also contributing to a wider evolving agenda of sustainable development, leveraging its unique private sector business model. And that is what the world committed to deliver by 2030, only 7 years away. And that is why I hope we can decide together on EBRD's limited and incremental expansion to sub-Saharan Africa and Iraq that has been many years in the making. The EBRD is well placed to pursue both of these vital objectives in parallel because of the strong position the bank is in today. For that, I pay tribute to the President, Odile Renaud-Basso, who has guided EBRD through the pandemic and has taken a leading role in mobilizing the international community in support of Ukraine. Before turning the focus of our discussions tomorrow, it is important to recall the bank's achievements since our last annual meeting in Marrakesh in May 2022. Under your leadership, Odile, the bank has continued to deliver strong results within the current strategic and capital framework, which we as governors approved in 2020. The implementation report on our agenda later today shows the great work that has been done on the key pillars of digital transition, of equality of opportunity, and of course, the mobilization of private finance for the climate emergency facing our planet. And crucially, the bank has again met its goal of investing more than half of its total annual investment in green economy transition projects last year. The continued delivery of this support to Ukraine and other regions of operations depends on us as shareholders and donors. And the annual donor meeting yesterday helped to develop a shared understanding of the most pressing needs and priorities. And it is clear that we all need to work together on this. At our plenary session tomorrow, I'll be asking you as governors to provide strategic guidance on how shareholders can best support the bank in its vital mission, addressing both pressing immediate needs as well as long-term transition gaps. Madam President, when you campaigned to lead this institution, you focused on, as you called it, ABC. A was for agility, which the bank has amply demonstrated in grown from strength to strength. You called a B for building back better, which at the time referred to the pandemic, but is more relevant than ever in our support for Ukraine. And the C was standing for clients and countries, which remain, of course, the focus of everything we do. And none of this work would be possible without the incredible work of the bank staff. And on behalf of all the governors, if I may, and all the shareholders, I want to thank them for the incredible work they do. The theme of this year's annual meeting is investing in resilience, which sums up so well what we are trying to do by taking the partnership of EBRD and its shareholders to a next level. Madam President, dear Odile, on behalf of all governors, thank you very much. Thank you to you and thank you to your dedicated staff for everything you and your staff have done, are doing, of course, and will be doing in support of the bank's mandate. Dear Odile, thank you for your leadership also. We look forward to hearing your perspectives on the challenges ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And now, if I may ask to maybe dim the lights a little bit, please. And I have the pleasure of inviting President Odile Renaud-Basso to address the meeting. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, thank you very much for your gracious words of support for the EBRD and our joint partnership. And thank you for the level of ambition you put. It puts us under huge pressure. We are delighted to hold this event in Uzbekistan and in your presence. Your Excellencies, governors, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the EBRD's 2023 annual meeting and business forum. And welcome to the ancient city of Samarkand, one of the treasures of Central Asia. This region has regained its historic role as a vital link on the Silk Road connecting East and West. And Uzbekistan itself is now a major investment destination. We at EBRD are very proud of the part we have played in putting the country back on the map of international investors since 2017. And greater momentum on reform to open up the economy, develop the private sector, and accelerate the green transition will, of course, attract more foreign investment. Holding our event here is our tribute to shared achievements and testament to the bank's commitment to Uzbekistan's reform agenda. I would like to thank the President and all our partners here for everything they have done to prepare for this week, and in general, to make the EBRD's work in Uzbekistan such a success. Thanks to our partnership, we have invested over 3 billion euros in the last 6 years, including more than 800 million euros last year alone. Some shining examples of that success are the 3 solar plants that can generate almost 900 megawatts of energy, whose financing we announced last month. Another is the bank's largest ever renewable energy project in our regions, in the shape of 2 wind plants in Bukhara, which will generate 1 gigawatt of power. We could not have achieved such results and many others elsewhere without our long experience, our local knowledge, our unique mandate, and our trademark focus on the private sector and policy reform. These are powerful strengths for the bank to deploy for the benefits of our existing regions, and, if you approve, in new ones too. These strengths are now more relevant, more in demand, and more important than ever. And so is, I believe, the EBRD. We are living through an age of alarming geopolitical tensions. The world and our countries of operation have been facing multiple crises: the pandemic, the dramatic impact of the war on Ukraine and the resulting energy and food crisis. Inflationary pressures are adding to the challenges. Our response has been swift and effective. Our investment reached the record level of 13 billion euros last year. Most importantly, the impact of these investments has also been very high. We can see that in our performance across the strategic theme you defined for us at the 2020 annual meeting when you also elected me as a bank president. Let me take them one by one. Firstly, green. Record green investment of 6.4 billion euros last year. The second year running, we have delivered on our pledge to invest half our business volume in green financing. Another pledge fulfilled, aligning all our activities with the goals of the Paris Agreement by the end of 2022. And a personal highlight for me, the leading role EBRD plays in the energy pillar of Egypt's pioneering nexus on water, food and energy, and the support received from world leaders for this strategy at COP27. Many of you today have helped launch this very exciting partnership of private and public funding for a just transition. Second, gender of equality and equality of opportunity. Gender-smart activities were part of 37% of our projects last year, well above the target. The number of inclusive projects also doubled year on year with a strong focus on skills and jobs. And protecting livelihoods and human capital was key to our response to Russia's war on Ukraine as well. Lastly, digital transition. Our approach to accelerating this, approved less than 18 months ago, is now delivering real results across our regions. 36 investments signed, 50 policy engagements launched, and more than 800 SMEs last year. In the midst of this, we also have moved to new headquarters, which embody our commitment to sustainability. And it was a great privilege for me personally to welcome King Charles in March to officially open our new home, one of Europe's greenest buildings. The King was deeply impressed, I think, by the diversity of the staff he met. This diversity is a huge asset for the bank. And I really want to pay tribute to the commitment and dedication of all our teams this past year. We should be very proud of the bank's outstanding work across 3 continents. Russia's aggression against Ukraine has been a stern test of the EBRD and our mission, one which will continue to shape much of what we do for years to come. It is an attack on the shared values which underpin the EBRD. It is costing many lives and causing much destruction. It is damaging and disrupting many economies. And it is creating much uncertainty, including here in Central Asia. This annual meeting and business forum is being held under the banner of Investing in Resilience. The Ukrainian people's own resilience has been an inspiration to me. It is what struck me most in my 2 trips to Kiev over the last year. Despite the air raids, despite the risk, despite the fear and the trauma, life goes on, and the country is united around a shared goal of freedom and, in the future, recovery. We have helped Ukraine keep the lights on, hit homes and businesses, ensure that trains continue to run, to repair war damage and safeguard human capital, and in many other ways. We deployed 1.7 billion euros last year, with a further 200 million euros mobilized from partner banks. We have committed to deliver at least 3 billion euros over 2022 and 2023, and that is what we will do. The war's destructive impact has not stopped at Ukraine's border, and nor has our response to the conflict. We have supported energy security in the Western Balkans and in Moldova, food security in the Middle East and North Africa, connectivity in Central Asia, and access to capital markets in Eastern Europe. Here again, we could not have done that without you and the generous financial contributions of our donors. We will continue to support Ukraine this year and in the longer term. We will do so in wartime and during Reconstruction on its path towards EU accession. Deciding how best to do that will be part of your discussions tomorrow. More support for Ukraine will help us to sustain capacity to deliver in all our regions. For example, our response to the dreadful earthquake in Turkey earlier this year. Across our region, the EBRD is, I repeat, more in demand and more important than ever before. The EBRD strengths are well known. Our long experience, our local knowledge, our unique mandate, and our trademark focus on the private sector and policy reform. With the support of you, our shareholders, we want to ensure that the bank is fully equipped for the mission ahead, and thus deliver maximum value for you and maximum benefit for all our regions. We must support them. It is our duty to do everything we can to do so. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Board of Governors, thank you very much to the President, Renaud-Basso, for her address. Thanks very much, Odile. Your Excellency, Mr. President, distinguished governors, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the opening session of the Board of Governors. And as Board of Governors, we will reconvene tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the Tashkent event room in the Samarkand Regency Amir Timur Hotel, in closed session format to continue our meeting with the plenary session. And this plenary session will be a quite critical moment, I would say, in the bank's history, as we will be taking forward key discussions and decisions that will shape the long-term strategic direction of the bank. I would therefore like to sort of encourage you and your delegations, of course, to arrive in good time so that we can make the best use of the session tomorrow. Following immediately after this opening session, we have a high-level panel on connectivity in an uncertain world here in the Registan event room, which will explore the role of connectivity as a means to address the economic crisis brought on by emerging geopolitical challenges. And I very much encourage you also here to attend this event, which will provide some further food, I would say, for thought ahead of our discussions tomorrow. And with this, that's my favorite one, with this I declare this opening session closed. Thank you very much.
Hurmatli yig'ilish qatnashchilari, ochilish marosimi yakunlandi.
We'd very much like you to stay for the high-level panel, so if you would like to stay, that will be beginning immediately in this room. So please stay in your seats if you wish to join the panel. It will be starting very soon. So please, if you're staying for the
Get the noise level in the room down. Thank you very much. Connectivity, as you know, spans multiple dimensions of economic activity, from infrastructure and digital networks to trade flows and value chains. Developments in recent years, including the effects of the pandemic and the war on Ukraine, as well as longer-term geopolitical shifts, those have just been mentioned several times during the meeting. All of these have disrupted connectivity across all these dimensions, with a very strong impact on many EBRD shareholder countries, both in this region, in Central Asia, and beyond. And this poses challenges for both economic integration and stability, as well as societal resilience, all three of which are, of course, key aims of the EBRD. In light of the overarching theme of this year's annual meeting, namely investing in resilience, we'll be asking how countries can address these challenges and how the EBRD can support them in doing so. We have an absolutely outstanding group of leaders with us here today to share their perspectives and insights. Before I introduce them, just a very quick reminder, we do have translation available for those who wish it via headphones if you are with us live here in the hall, and otherwise via the Interactio app. Now it is my very great pleasure to welcome our high-level speakers, starting with His Excellency Sardor Umurzakov, who is head of the presidential administration here in...
I'm really sorry, Mr. Umurzakov now went to the airport.
I'm sorry, are you Mr. Khojayev?
Yes.
Yes, excuse me.
I just want to apologize.
Okay, no problem at all. We do have double names on our record, so thank you very much for the correction. His Excellency Jamshid Khojayev is with us here on stage. He is Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Uzbekistan. Welcome, and thank you so much for taking part in this panel. I'm also very pleased to welcome His Excellency Dumitru Alaiba. He is Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Economic Development and Digitalization for the Republic of Moldova. Thank you also for being with us. Seated next to him is Her Excellency Rania Al-Mashad. She is Egypt's Minister of International Cooperation. Welcome. And we are very pleased that His Excellency Valdis Dombrovskis can be with us. He's Vice President of the European Commission, responsible for an economy that works for people, and he's also in charge of trade. And finally, the EBRD's Chief Economist, Beata Javorcik, is also with us here on stage. And Beata, I'd like to ask you to please get us started with a brief overview of what the bank is seeing in regard to connectivity disruptions triggered by all of the recent developments that I mentioned, and also how that is affecting particularly this region. Could we have sound, please, on the podium, Mike? Could we please activate the microphones on the right-hand pult? Or could we get a hand mic?
Perfect. We have the sound. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me set the stage for the panel discussion with a few words on the recent economic developments in the EBRD regions of operations. As you can see on the graph, after a severe downturn induced by COVID-19, the EBRD regions have enjoyed a robust recovery. That recovery was interrupted by the war. And while in the first half of last year, spending of savings accumulated during the pandemic was helping keep the growth going, there was a definite slowdown in the last 2 quarters. And in this year, we are going to see a subdued economic growth with an uptick next year. Now, Central Asia and the Caucasus look somewhat different. They are experiencing a much more resilient year in terms of growth. Some of these countries export commodities. Many of them have benefited from influx of capital and labor from Russia. In particular, influx of businesses in the IT sector is worth mentioning here. Remittances from Central Asian workers working in Russia have remained strong. And also, this region has positioned itself as an intermediary when it comes to trade between the West and Russia. Now, in contrast, as you see in this graph, this year is going to be very challenging for Central Europe and the Baltic states. High inflation is eroding the purchasing power of the consumers. Elevated energy prices reduce competitiveness of manufacturing. And lower growth in Western Europe, in particular in Germany, is going to reduce the demand for export. Similar factors are at play in Western Balkans and Southeast Europe, though there, particularly in Southeast Europe, EU funds and prospects of entering the Eurozone have boosted investment and confidence. Turkey is dealing with aftermath of the earthquake that made us reduce our projections by 0.5% this year. And when it comes to southern and eastern Mediterranean, the region is not only affected by spillovers from Western Europe, it's also suffering from fiscal and external vulnerabilities. Last but not least, Ukraine. After its GDP declined by about 1/3 last year, we are expecting this level of economic activity to continue in absence of major changes to the war activities. Now let's look at inflation. Inflation has been a big challenge for the region. We have seen inflation of food coming down, prices of energy have come down, but the core inflation has remained stubborn. And we are seeing that households are just getting by. While in the West, we often talk about the cost of living crisis, actually it is households in emerging countries that are suffering more. And majority of people in our regions are just making the ends meet. And if they lost their main source of income, they wouldn't be able to cover their basic expenses by more than a month. Now let's look at wages. We have seen a decline in real wages in most countries of operations. Central Asia and the Caucasus are an exception in this respect. Finally, when it comes to the path of disinflation, the projections that you see out there in yellow, these are projections that come from the International Monetary Fund, they assume or they expect that inflation will go back to the pre-pandemic level by the end of 2025. And yet, if you compare these projections to the previous episodes of disinflation, they seem quite optimistic. So actually, inflation may stay with us for longer than what we expect. Now, let me bring us closer to the discussion of the panel by looking at earnings calls. We have analyzed what global firms tell their analysts and their investors, and we have seen that firms are very concerned particularly about supply chain risks. And this reflects several developments, several big trends we have seen in international trade. The first trend is the change in the trading patterns, particularly in this region. As exports from the West to Russia dried out, we've seen an increase in trade being intermediated by Central Asia and Caucasus. Moreover, we've seen increase in exports from Turkey and China going into Russia. Second, the process of reallocation of global value chains has started. It was triggered by the war. not because the countries involved have been greatly integrated in global value chains, but because the war has brought about a realization that geopolitical shocks are not going away anytime soon, and that the cost of inaction is greater than the cost of boosting resilience. Finally, the geopolitical tensions are with us. The US-China trade war has not stopped. There are further tensions, and there is a real danger that the world will split or fragment and engage in friendshoring, and we will see globalization going into reverse. So let me stop here and thank you for your attention.
Beata, thank you very much for setting the scene, and we will now hear how the panelists see it. And I'd like to start with the country representatives, if I may. And all three of the countries on the panel have experienced serious disruptions, whether it's food and energy insecurity, an influx of refugees, or a decline in export and or tourism revenues. So let me very quickly ask you, we are compressed on time, so if you just give us a snapshot, please, of how those connectivity disruptions are impacting your economies and societies, then we can move on to some of the specific challenges that you face. And I'll begin here, if I may, with Mr. Khoshayev.
Thank you, moderator. I wouldn't say, I'll be wrong if I say that the disruptions and the geopolitical situation that is now happening around the Ukraine did not affect the economy and the ordinary people's life of Uzbekistan. So I would rather say that things are changing, and for the industry and for the trade, I'll give you some examples. And our president today was quoting that the cost of the transportation almost rised by 5-fold. And of course we have even during the pandemic, if we monitor, then we had some disruptions on the food as well. And again, the inflation. So this is the package of the problems that you get when you have this disruption on the connectivity. And it is all known. It's maybe in some European countries you can really feel that more closely, but in the Central Asia countries, due to the production of some other goods and the stability, the big chunk of the agriculture, then you wouldn't feel, for instance, on a food security issue. So I'll better concentrate on the what are we doing in terms of the challenge, how we are tackling this challenge. So on the, I would say we have, I'll divide it on just to make it brief. On legislative thing, as we are not a part of the so-called a zone of the CIS, Eurasia, we are trying to work with each of our neighboring countries, with Kyrgyzstan, with Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, on the decreasing the customs burden, and then we are working on the eliminating different trade barriers. And for instance, with Tajikistan we have the free trade zone regime with some exceptions, and we are working on that exceptions as well. So working on the accession to the government tenders. So all this is done to make trade more free and to ease the problems of the exporters and the importers. And so far this is going so, I would say, successfully, because after the President Mirziyoyev's reforms, now we are getting very close to with our neighborhood. And the second, of course, the bilateral projects. That would be and the different kind of platforms. So on the bilateral cooperation projects, that's settling the cross-border trading zones and cross-border industrial zones. We have industrial zone launching with the Kazakhstan and with the Tajikistan. Last month we signed an agreement regarding the establishing a trade zone, same with Turkmenistan as well. And of course all these projects will really help to increase the cross-border trade. And the second, now we are working on the, for instance, on the food security and the energy. We are calculating the project. We are calculating the balance where, for instance, Tajikistan have competitiveness and Uzbekistan, you know, the competitive side. So these projects are for bilateral and trilateral. So on food security, for instance, with Kazakhstan, processing of the grain and the you know, production of the oil is very desirable, and we are working on it, and hopefully we'll have some factories. And for instance, with the Kyrgyzstan, we are working on the producing the green energy, which is with Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. So all in all, I would like to add that, of course, this geopolitical situation is is making a lot of disturbance, but on the other hand, it is a trigger for the diversification as well. Mm-hmm. So the many traditional trade partners, they will think about the diversification, they will think about the connectivity. As we are working on the, you know, Uzbekistan is double landlocked country, and we are working on the big projects with our neighbors. Railroad.
I want to come to the railroad in just a moment. I'm just going to, in fact, stop you there, but very interesting, the aspects of regional connectivity that you have just underlined. And in fact, you did sign an agreement last December strengthening ties with Kazakhstan, which is a major shift in those regional ties. So let me go next, if I may, to Minister Alaiba, and to talk a little bit about the disruptions that Moldova is seeing.
Yes, thank you, Melinda, and thank you everyone for this opportunity to speak. Well, as it's not really a secret, Moldova's challenges in this last year were dictated by the war in neighboring Ukraine. We are by far the biggest collateral victim of this war, besides, of course, the brave Ukrainians who are fighting and defending Ukraine, Moldova, and the entire Europe. But, of course, this war has turned into multiple also economic challenges and consequences for the country, because while the year was beginning with very good numbers, 24th of February happened, and we all woke up in a new reality. And this new reality is that Moldova was and still is connected to the outside world, trade-related, I mean, via effectively 5 border crossings with Romania, because we lost, for example, one of the main trading hubs for Moldova was the port of Odessa, and then the land route for the railways are, of course, it's not available for trading in wartime. So that is, of course, exercising pressure on the competitiveness of our goods outside. Because of increased costs, because of increased waiting times. Our border crossings often are a traffic jam with trucks, because we also at the same time participating in solidarity lanes and supporting trade with Ukraine, which is flowing through Moldova. So this all is a huge pressure and a huge test for our infrastructure, be it railways, be it roads, be it border crossings, and so on. Then related to energy, you know, no one in their sane mind would have thought that Russia would choose a military strategy to bomb civilian energy infrastructure. That's hospitals and schools and kindergartens. But this is again what shocked the entire world in this winter. During this winter, Moldova was directly affected, as you might have seen in the news. We had actually a couple of blackouts because of the war in Ukraine, us being connected with the Ukrainian grid, and that again has proven a challenge that we had to quickly overcome with the support of our friends and partners, and with huge solidarity around Ukraine and also around Moldova at the same time. So we have overcome this, as well as the challenges with gas access, because this is actually the first winter when Moldova did not buy gas from Gazprom, and that's of course also due to the support from the EBRDs, the first winter when we built our gas reserves. When it comes to, of course, managing the flows of refugees, as you know, Moldova has hosted biggest amount per capita of refugees, especially in the first months of the war. Moldova is until now home for about 80,000 refugees, mostly women and children, who are at the moment still residing in Moldova, and they are welcome. They are our friends, they are our neighbors. It's our obligation to support that, but then again, that has proven a test for our system, how resilient the system is, not without challenges, not without hiccups here and there, but I'm glad to say that we managed this tremendous effort, and it was only possible because we've seen mobilization and solidarity without precedent, not only among the international partners, but also inside our country, when people who would otherwise fight each other and dislike each other, they worked side by side and hand by hand to support the authorities and to support the refugees in this tragedy. So, of course, the challenges are there, and I'm not here to say that Moldovan institutions are the most resilient, because we know we have still a lot to fix in order to overcome this fragility of institutions. However, with help and support from our partners, it is possible, and we've proven that even something unimaginable for our society, like how can you survive without Russian gas, even that was possible. So thank you.
And I want to come back to the topic of those international partnerships in just a moment, but let me go over now to Minister Al-Mashat. And of course, Egypt has seen disruptions essentially along all the dimensions that I mentioned earlier: food, energy, refugees, exports, tourism revenues, and so on. So tell us about the situation.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the government of Uzbekistan for hosting us in what will be hopefully very successful meetings and discussions tomorrow among governors about the long-term implications of many of these disruptions. I think I want to start by saying that the crises, be it COVID or the implications from the Russian-Ukraine conflict, is really showing that the world is more coupled than we actually thought. We came out of COVID with implications that affected everyone, and the way out was more solidarity and more engagement on the vaccines, as well as many other policy, as well as international partnerships. When I take the case of Egypt, during COVID, there was fiscal stimulus to try and stave off the implications from the decline in the tourism sector, which is 15% of GDP, and the slide in revenues was quite hefty. There were also sizable capital inflows on the back of several reforms that had taken place in the period before. Once the war happened, Egypt is a major importer of wheat as well as other grains, and therefore the disruption that took place affected very heavily the import bill, if you will. We had to very quickly find alternatives, but at the same time, given the high international food prices, and as Beata showed in her presentation, food, energy were quite substantial, and those also had fiscal implications. Moreover, as inflation globally moved up, we have central banks, particularly the Fed, tightening, and therefore there was a flight of capital out of emerging markets into the developed economies. And here we see a reversal of capital flight. So we had a macroeconomic implication when it comes to inflation, when it comes to capital inflows, and this of course adds tremendous fiscal pressure. Nonetheless, and let me here maybe give a silver lining. When energy prices shot up, we had to rethink about our gas consumption. And we were able to redirect and reorient into more of our renewable stocks, and therefore we could export more gas. So this was one of the positive implications. President Odile is here, and in her speech she talked about the nexus of water, food and energy. The energy pillar of this platform, NOAFI, is decommissioning additional plants to be able to avail gas for exports and therefore help the balance of payments. So this is one of the implications. The other, which is extremely important, the international partnerships with many of our multilateral development banks, the European Commission and many others who came in on different fronts. Since the EU is beside me, maybe I mention the investments into silos for grain storage. That was one of the implications or one of the partnerships that took place. The other is also EBRD and other international institutions providing financing to the private sector in renewables. So this is also was very important as a way to mitigate the implications from the war. Moreover, there have been also with the World Bank and many other institutions negotiations as well as programs designated on both social safety nets, which were extremely important at the time, as well as collaboration on other projects. I want to conclude by saying, and this was shown in the video during the opening session, three important words that we all use, particularly in our strategy with EBRD as well as others: inclusive, green, and digital. These are very important pillars for any country as they're designing their strategies with the international community, with their national programs. And these three words are extremely important because under them come several programs which not only help at the time of crisis, but help you be preemptive in the wake of anything that can happen. A final word, the geopolitical tensions continue. In the case of Egypt, we have what's going on in Sudan, and that has created additional inflow of refugees from that border. So in addition to hosting many nationalities from the region after 2011 and 2013. Now we have an influx from the south. So this is also another implication that is happening. And so the final thing is that the world is more coupled than we think, and therefore, hopefully, in working together, we will be able to rely on one another for the longer-term strategies to stave off the implications of crises. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And let me go now to Vice President Dombrovskis. And the EU has, of course, been making quite a concerted push to strengthen ties with this region. You headed the EU delegation at the very first EU Central Asia Forum in 2021, and you will also be attending the second forum, as I understand it, later on this week. You've heard about the needs, the disruptions, the challenges that the countries of the region and, of course, Egypt also are facing. To what degree can the EU really support these countries in the face of these kinds of really massive disruptions?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for this opportunity to participate in this EBRD high-level panel. On today's topic on interconnectivity and on disruptions, it's true that the world is interconnected as never before, and it has brought many advantages in terms of trade, new markets, labor forces, diffusion of technology. But it also has made the world more fragile. And COVID-19 pandemic and the impact of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine clearly shows this. And we had seen disruptions in supply chains, on food security, increases in food and energy prices. So EU is now responding strongly to the direct and indirect consequences of this, both within the EU, but also in our partner countries. Well, as regards the situation with the EU economy is proving resilient in face of those disruptions, and if half a year ago we were concerned about possible recession in the EU this year, now we see that the economical growth in EU is continuing, even though slower, at 1% this year, and also the peak of inflation seems to be behind us. But there are a number of topics which we need to address. One is obviously the question of food security, where we have responded across different work tracks on solidarity, providing support to our partner countries, on sustainable food production and resilience, also helping our partner countries to support the local food production and decrease dependency on expensive or unsustainable agricultural inputs. So all in all, what we call Team Europe, meaning EU, its member states, European financial institutions, so the total support for food security actions already amounts to nearly 18 billion euros. Specific issue we had to address in a context of Russia's war against Ukraine was a blockage of Black Sea ports and our Solidarity Lanes initiative. And there it must be said, Moldova is one of our partner countries in this, and Egypt is one of the beneficiaries. So basically in face of Russia's blockage of Ukrainian grain exports and other foodstuff exports, we are providing alternatives through the EU, and EBRD is also playing important role in this Solidarity Lanes project. Discussing the question of connectivity in Central Asia region, indeed we want to strengthen our partnership with Central Asia region, and right now, for example, we are in cooperation with EBRD preparing to publish a study on sustainable transport corridors in Central Asia, so to assess viability, economical viability of different transport corridors, what are the bottlenecks, how to address those bottlenecks in a context of disruptions once again created by Russia's war. So you already mentioned EU Central Asia Economic Forum in Almaty, which will start in just 2 days. Indeed, that's going to be one of the topics which we are going to discuss. And in autumn, we will organize an investors conference based on the results of this study. In any case, we see lots of potential and geopolitical importance of engaging with Central Asia region.
Thank you very much. We have very little time left on our clock, but I want to see if we can do one very quick final round of discussion to talk a little bit about the balance between interdependence and autonomy, because this is something, of course, we're hearing a lot of discussion about. Beate talked about friendshoring, decoupling, under whatever term one wants to use, but a number of you have told us about new connections that have developed due to the geopolitical shifts that we're seeing. As Minister Al-Mashat said, the world is more interconnected than many of us think. So let me ask a little bit about that balance to each of you. And if I may start here with you, Deputy Prime Minister, I'd be curious now to hear a little bit more, for example, about those regional ties that you mentioned, and in particular about the decision that was taken at last fall's meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to move forward on the long-discussed railway line from China to Europe via Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan, yes, sorry. And when you think this actually will begin to move toward construction?
Well, thanks for the question. I think this railroad is pretty close to the implementation. And tomorrow in China the agreement will be signed, the memorandum, and the feasibility study should be finishing maybe in a couple of months, because it has been started almost a year ago, and we launched Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan and China project office, which is located in Kyrgyzstan. And at the moment now we are using the corridor which takes around 12 weeks or so. And I hope this could be the way that would really connect Uzbekistan and China, and of course the Kyrgyzstan with its closest way. And regarding the Trans-Afghan corridor, we've done initial feasibility study, and it costs around 6 billion. At the moment we are working on the making this railway more marketable, and I think we are doing a lot of marketing, because as you know, the Afghanistan has a potential, and this corridor could lead us directly to the ports. Mm-hmm. But due to the situation in Afghanistan, many IFIs they are doubting on financing this project. But the perspective underneath is, very bright, and we know that it is a bankable project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And over to Minister Alaiba. And infrastructural barriers have in the past limited Moldova's ability to promote trade integration. But last week, if I'm correct, you became the first country to sign an agreement allowing you to apply for infrastructure funding and support under the new Connecting Europe facility. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's affecting your country's perspective on this balance between autonomy and interdependence?
Well, Moldova is, just like most countries in Europe, it's a small country with small population. So there is no way we could even imagine to be in some sort of way self-sufficient, because for us this is equal to isolation, this is equal to stagnation, or even regress. So just like a lot of other countries before us, our choice is to be cooperating with a group of countries who have similar values, who share these values, and who are reliable and predictable partners to us, just like Moldova wants to be a reliable, a credible partner for their peers. Of course, this year has proven time and again that and if there is any shift in what we intend to do, it's to pay even more attention to infrastructure, to logistics, because as a landlocked country, in order to be able to do trade with, with cheap costs, with small waiting times and so on, efficiency is the key, and that means logistics, because every kilometer costs, every hour costs, and in the end, this is translated into the price for our products, for our goods. And also it's in the price of the imported goods that our consumers pay on the shelves. So infrastructure and logistics will be dictating our priorities. Of course, among efforts to increase the industrialization and to improve our trade, but this is something that unfortunately has been overlooked in many ways. Now we have EBRD as a very strong partner among other friends that we have that are ready to support our investments in infrastructure, and by this I mean roads. We are working on railways. There is much more to be done on railways than this current effort, but it's a start. And as I mentioned, the border crossings, we have to look outside if our economy is to prosper. This means for just like any small country in Europe, that means look outside to promote export and to be part of the value chains that are the regional value chains.
Thank you very much. And Minister Al-Mashat, Egypt, of course, historically at the very nexus of trade routes linking Asia, Europe, and Africa. You are building amazing new port facilities in Egypt. How do you see, what's your vision for the country's future when it comes to connectivity, and what help do you need from those international partners you mentioned?
Well, thank you very much. I mean, we have the Suez Canal Economic Zone, and currently, with EBRD, we have several programs there. We also have programs on improving ports such as the Damietta port and Port Said and many others. But what is very important, you mentioned the interdependence versus autonomy, and I believe that nobody can deny the interdependence, and this concept of we are slowly deglobalizing, I think, is a little bit faulty in some sense. Nonetheless, each country has its own autonomy or its country ownership. So we take the example, for example, of Vision 2030. Every country has its own Vision 2030, but at the end of the day, we're interdependent because all of us want to achieve global goals. So this is just an example. In the case of the ports, Egypt wants to localize many of the industries, and we are a gateway to Africa. So the ports act as and the Suez Canal Economic Zone particularly acts as a very good example of connectivity between the East and Africa. We have, for example, most recently with the Koreans have set up industry for railway trains. This is also going to create exports to African nations. This is one example, and there are many others. Moreover, with of course, the historic Suez Canal itself, and the investments that we have done several years ago to make two waterways has also helped in terms of the time for shipping, again, a step towards increasing interconnectivity. So there is plenty that we are doing, again, from a country perspective, but the partnerships with international community, be it EBRD, be it the World Bank, and many of the private sector players as well, is something that has been undergoing, we have been undergoing, and also future plans do exist for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, to you, Vice President Dombrovskis, we don't need to call it deglobalization, but clearly we are seeing shifts in the pattern of globalization, including in the EU, where industrial policy is putting a very strong focus now on autonomy, at least in certain sectors. How do you think that that will affect the EU's role in future when it comes to working together with countries like those on the panel?
Indeed. In Europe, we also have discussions about what we call open strategic autonomy, but I insist on the word open in this. So we remain committed to multilateralism. We remain committed to rules-based international cooperation and would act multilaterally whenever we can, but we are ready to act unilaterally if it's necessary. As regards specifically area of connectivity, it's exactly now when we had launched our flagship project, Global Gateway, to engage with our partners, leveraging our joint interests and advancing our common objectives. So our Global Gateway initiative has proved useful in tackling both consequences of the pandemic and Russia's war of aggression. Overall, it's there to support our partners' countries' connectivity, green and digital transitions. And what sets our approach apart from other offers is 360 degrees combination of hard investments with soft investments to develop enabling frameworks, skills, innovation, and also promoting our values, norms and standards, including the ones which are enshrined in Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals in Paris Agreement. So basically following high investment standards based on good governance, transparency, sustainability and equal partnership. But more broadly, we are not talking about deglobalization or decoupling. We rather talk about the need to diversify our supply chains to make sure that our supply chains are resilient and engaging with reliable partners around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for taking us back to resilience. So I will go to Beate for the 30-second wrap-up, if I may, but if I listen to what we're hearing, then clearly a resounding vote for interdependence going forward, and some very interesting remarks about shifts in regional ties due to the various disruptions we're talking about. And with that, I hand it back to you for some quick closing thoughts.
Let me highlight 3 ways in which the EBRD can support connectivity. Trade finance. We heard a lot about new businesses, new connections, new trade linkages. By definition, new business relationships are more risky. Trade finance can alleviate this risk, and EBRD facilitates availability of trade finance. Digitalization. Access to fast, reliable internet allows firms to find new buyers and suppliers within countries, across countries. And here the EBRD supports initiatives ranging from rollout of fiber optic cable to digitalization of trade finance document. And finally, infrastructure, whether transport, storage, it helps connect businesses within countries, across countries, and across regions. And we've just heard about the initiative connecting Central Asia to Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Let's give all of our panel a very warm round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to everyone in the audience for your attention and also for your patience with our slight overrun on the time here. If you're interested in hearing more about some of the topics that we have just been discussing, do attend our Value Chains panel tomorrow at noon, where we will pick up on some of these points. Now I close this session and I wish everyone a very enjoyable evening. Goodbye.
Thank you.